Okay, so this is our next video, video 3 out of 5. Okay, so 5 videos altogether. If you've not watched the first two, the introduction video and then the risk assessment part 2, then you need to watch them because part 2 of the risk assessment should be completed before part 1. Okay, and part 1's looking at the introduction and things like that, so it's actually easier once you've done your inspection and your risk assessment part to then write about the areas you inspected. It's a little bit easier than doing part 1 first. Okay, so this is basically then after this we'll do part 3 and part 4. Part 3 being your longest, the longest part. Okay, which you do need to make sure you allocate adequate time for, but that will be in the next video. Okay, so most importantly, I'll close that down and we'll look at first of all we have the guidance document, and then we have the risk assessment. Okay, so you should have already completed part 2. Okay, if you remember this is the NEBOSH's example. Okay, but we use this for part 1. Okay, so the NC Skills example that we send out to our own students does not have part 1, 3 and 4. We use the NEBOSH example to cover parts 1, 3 and 4. Okay, so you'll be looking at document number 2 if you're one of our own students. Document number 2, new NEBOSH example risk assessment PDF document, basically January 2021. Okay, so that will be emailed out to you. If you're not one of our students, your course provider will provide this, or you can get it from NEBOSH. It's just the NG2 Risk Assessment Guidance, it will be called, something along those lines. Okay, so you'll see here, part 1 is a background to the organisation. Okay, so name of the organisation, site location, number of workers, general description of the organisation, description of the area to be inspected in the risk assessment, and then we have any other relevant information. Okay, and then after that we'll then look at this section, but we'll split it up. We'll do this first part, this first page. Okay, but you'll see quite clearly in the guidance, this is why the guidance is very, very important to look at. So if you open up the guidance, so page 5, so the guidance, if you remember this document, okay, this is the NEBOSH guidance, page 5. This is where you find some of the detail. Okay, this gives you an indication of, the area, the size of the workplace. This is what we covered in previous videos. If you can't find you increase the size of the workplace. It can be anonymous and all that kind of stuff. It's all here. Okay, so the name of the organisation, as I say, I think it's written here somewhere. You can change the name of the organisation. Yep, and you can change the location. Okay, but the rest of it has to be factual, and that's what it will say here. I'm not going to read over word for word, but it's on this. Okay, so there you go. You don't need to give the full address, just where it's located. So the example they've got is Leicestershire. Okay, how many workers are employed by the organisation? Yeah. A general description of the organisation, which must include information on the products manufactured and our services provided, the types of activities undertaken and the shift patterns worked. Yeah. So how many workers and what other shift patterns? Do they work night shifts? Do they work day shifts? I've actually had people failing because they had everything perfect risk assessment, but they didn't have they didn't have the shift patterns. Okay, so just make sure you've got all these things in. Yeah, write it down, break it down, make sure you can tick next to it if you've included it. Types of activities undertaken, tick. Shift patterns worked, tick. Put a wee tick next to them. Okay, and this makes sure that you don't miss anything out. So tell us a bit about your company, what the whole company does, not necessarily the areas you inspected, because that will be the bit that we're going to cover in point 5 here. But what does the whole company do? And an international manufacturing company, and we manufacture, I don't know, aeroplane parts or something. Okay. Then look at, what did you inspect? Okay, did you inspect the whole premises? Yeah, which could take days. Okay, some premises are massive. Okay, or did you inspect ground floor engineering workshop number 1? Okay, the welfare facilities for that workshop, one of the canteens, the office, car park number 2. Okay, And as I said previously, if you don't find enough hazards, that's why you would then increase the area that you inspect. But that's what goes in point 5. And I'll show you how this will look in the example document that NEBOSH provide. Okay. Any other relevant information, which you saw on the second page of the risk assessment, who has day-to-day health and safety responsibilities in the organisation? Is it you, or is there somebody else that's responsible for health and safety? Okay, there we go. So the examiner does not work there. The person that's going to mark this, they need to know as much as they can about your organisation. Okay, so they can then determine whether your risk assessment is suitable and sufficient. And this is only for examining purposes. Your normal risk assessments that you would have in your workplace would not normally have a parts 1, 3 and 4, for example. Okay, this is just to make it more kind of an assignment based risk assessment, and it helps the examiner when they come to assess the actual part 2, because part 2 is going to hold the key information. Okay, I'm just going to show you, before I move on to the next page, how that looks on the risk assessment. Name of the organisation, yep, NEBOSH General Garage, yep. Location, number of workers, general description of the organisation, yeah. Shift patterns, how long is it open for, 8 to 8, yeah. What does the organisation do? So that's what we covered a few minutes ago. Description of the area that you inspected, and then any other relevant information. But feel free to pause this video and play it again. As I say, I'm conscious that you don't want to be sitting listening to me for hours. So, and I do have a habit of waffling on. If you've been in my class, you know I like to talk. So, although I'm kind of talking to myself at the moment, but or talking to a microphone or a screen. So, not expecting a response, but okay. So that's the first part. We're still looking at part 1, but we'll split it into 2 sections to make it a bit easier. Okay. Then for the next section of the part 1 risk assessment, outline how the risk assessment was carried out. Yeah, and look at the sources of information, who you spoke to, how you identified the hazards, what is already being done, and any additional controls that may be required. And you look at, it shows you exactly here what you need to do. Okay, what references did they use? Okay. After looking at the sources of information, I went round the workshop, talking to people. You could be looking at manufacturers' information and looking at previous inspection records, etc. There's a lot of different things you could look at. Okay. So have a read over that just to see how it's worded. Just be careful, don't copy and paste anything. NEBOSH do use software that will detect if plagiarism has taken place. Okay. Also check the accident book to find out what the history of accidents were, which could then identify that there's an issue with slips and trips maybe. Okay, we have 50 slips and trips a year, for example. Then you might look to, okay, let's put that into the risk assessment. It does seem to be housekeeping that's the issue that keeps cropping up. So you tend to find that in area risk assessments. Slips and trips are things that might always occur or possibly occur in organisations. Okay. There we go, what's already been done. So just have a wee read over this. This is basically for part 2. That's just, as I say, it's a guide. It's to stop people putting in, 20 words. So 200 words is the guide. Try not to write too much, obviously, because it's more work for you, and it's just more waffle for everybody else to read. Okay. So that is. I'll just show you how it looks in the guidance before we finish part 1. Okay. There we go. They've actually put the example in there for part 1, so you can read over it. Yeah. Okay. So this is the guidance for part 1. So just make sure you look over that. Okay. So as I say, that's part 1 of the risk assessment completed. So in a few seconds or the next video we will look at parts 3, and then after that we'll look at part 4.